On the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary, Laura expected roses or a quiet dinner reservation, something simple and predictable. But instead, Michael slid a cream-colored envelope across the kitchen counter in their Chicago home, his expression calm yet unreadable. And when she opened it and saw a plane ticket to Charleston along with a 3-night reservation at a historic inn by the harbor, her first reaction was confusion rather than excitement, because the ticket had only her name on it. She looked up slowly and asked, "You're not coming?" And Michael shook his head with a soft smile, explaining that she had been carrying too much for too long. Work deadlines, household details, emotional support for his new business, and he thought she deserved time away to breathe, to rest, to remember herself. And while his words sounded thoughtful, something unsettled her. Not because she doubted his love, but because the gesture felt like a solution to a question she hadn't asked out loud. At 38, Laura had become efficient at holding everything together, managing her marketing team downtown with steady confidence, keeping their calendar organized, paying bills on time, remembering family birthdays, supporting Michael's long hours as he built his company from scratch, and somewhere in the routine she had stopped noticing her own exhaustion. Yet when he said she needed time alone, it made her wonder if he had noticed something she had ignored. She smiled and thanked him, telling herself this was generous, this was romantic in its own practical way. But later that night, as she folded laundry and Michael answered emails at the dining table, she caught herself watching him from across the room and sensing a distance that had grown quietly between them. Not dramatic, not painful, just steady and unspoken. 2 weeks later, she stood at O'Hare Airport with a small suitcase, the terminal buzzing with travelers hugging goodbye, laughing, arguing gently over boarding passes. And Michael stood beside her checking his watch because he had a meeting to return to. And when he kissed her cheek and said, "Call me when you land," she felt a quick flicker of disappointment she couldn't fully explain, as if she had hoped he might hesitate, might say he wished he were coming too. Instead, he squeezed her hand and hurried off, leaving her standing alone near security, adjusting the strap of her purse and telling herself she was being dramatic. On the plane, she chose a window seat and watched the city shrink below the clouds, thinking about how 10 years earlier she and Michael had taken spontaneous road trips with no plan, singing along to the radio, dreaming about the future, promising each other adventure. And she wondered when their conversations had shifted from dreams to logistics. She wasn't unhappy, she reminded herself, just tired. But the quiet of the flight forced her to sit with feelings she usually pushed aside with productivity. When the plane landed in Charleston, warm air wrapped around her like a soft blanket, so different from the cool Chicago breeze she had left behind. And as she stepped into the small airport, she felt both light and strangely untethered, like someone had removed a familiar weight from her shoulders, and she wasn't sure how to stand without it. The taxi ride to the historic inn took her past pastel houses, palm trees, and streets lined with iron balconies, and she watched everything carefully, realizing how long it had been since she traveled alone. The inn itself was charming, with white shutters and polished wooden floors that creaked gently as she rolled her suitcase inside, and the woman at the front desk greeted her warmly, calling her Ms. Bennett, with a smile that felt personal even though they had just met. When Laura reached her room and closed the door behind her, silence settled in, different from the silence at home because this one carried possibility instead of routine. And she stood in the center of the room for a long moment, unsure what to do next. No dinner to cook, no email to answer, no husband asking about tomorrow's schedule. She unpacked slowly, placing her clothes neatly in drawers, then sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone, half expecting Michael to text again, but there was nothing urgent waiting for her. She walked out onto the small balcony where the harbor shimmered in the late afternoon light, boats moving lazily across the water, and for the first time in years she had nowhere she needed to be. Instead of feeling instantly relaxed, she felt exposed, as if without her responsibilities, she wasn't sure who she was supposed to be. She tried to label the feeling as simple travel nerves, but deep down she sensed something else unfolding, a question rising quietly. If she wasn't managing everything, supporting everyone, solving problems every hour of the day, then who was she at her core? That evening, she wandered through nearby streets, passing restaurants filled with couples celebrating. And she felt a brief ache realizing she was alone on an anniversary trip. Even if the trip had been Michael's idea, she told herself it was practical, that someone needed to stay behind to run the business, that mature marriages required sacrifice. Yet, as she returned to the inn and climbed into the large, quiet bed, she admitted to herself that part of her had wanted him beside her, sharing the unfamiliar city, holding her hand as they explored. Instead, she lay staring at the ceiling, listening to distant harbor sounds, and recognized that this trip was not just a gift, but a mirror, reflecting back parts of her life she had stopped examining. She loved her husband, she respected their history, but somewhere along the way she had traded spontaneity for stability, passion for predictability, and as sleep slowly pulled her under, one thought lingered stronger than the rest. Maybe this journey was not about rest at all. Maybe it was about rediscovering the woman she used to be before life became a list of responsibilities, and that realization both excited and frightened her. Because if she changed, everything else might have to change too. The first morning in Charleston, Laura woke before sunrise out of habit, her body still trained to Chicago time and busy routines, and for a few seconds she forgot where she was, reaching automatically for her phone to check emails. But when she saw the soft cream walls of the inn and heard distant seagulls instead of traffic, she remembered she had nowhere to rush to, no meeting to lead, no breakfast to prepare for anyone else, and that realization felt both peaceful and uncomfortable. She lay still, staring at the ceiling, unsure what to do with a morning that belonged only to her, then finally slipped out of bed, pulled on a light sweater, and stepped outside into warm coastal air that carried the scent of salt and blooming flowers. She walked without direction, passing historic homes with wide porches, noticing details she would normally miss: the shape of iron gates, the soft hum of early cafe music, the slow rhythm of a city that did not seem in a hurry. And as she reached the waterfront, she paused to watch boats drift across the harbor, their movement calm and unforced, and something inside her loosened slightly. No one here knew her schedule, no one expected her to answer a question. She was simply a woman standing by the ocean. That anonymity felt freeing. She bought coffee from a small corner cafe and sat alone at an outdoor table, observing couples laugh, joggers pass by, an older man reading the newspaper, and instead of feeling left out, she felt curious, as if she were seeing life from a different angle. After finishing her coffee, she wandered into a narrow street lined with boutiques and art shops, and a small bookstore caught her attention, its window filled with handwritten staff recommendations and faded maps of the South. Something about it pulled her in before she had time to overthink. Inside, the scent of paper and wood surrounded her, and she ran her fingers along book spines the way she used to in college, remembering how much she once loved getting lost in stories. "Looking for anything special?" a warm voice asked from above, and she looked up to see a man about her age standing on a small ladder, organizing a shelf of travel memoirs. He introduced himself as Daniel, the owner, his smile easy and unguarded. Laura shook his hand politely and said she was just browsing, explaining she was visiting from Chicago. Their conversation began lightly: favorite authors, the charm of small towns versus big cities. But there was a natural flow to it that surprised her, because she realized how long it had been since she spoke to someone without multitasking or thinking about the next responsibility. Daniel recommended a memoir about reinvention and said almost casually, "Sometimes a new place reminds you who you were before everything got loud." And the sentence lingered in her mind long after she paid for the book and stepped back onto the sunny street. That afternoon she returned to the inn and sat on the balcony with the book open in her lap, reading slowly, not skimming the way she usually did, and as she turned each page she felt memories rising. Sketching in college, dreaming of starting her own creative agency, traveling without strict plans, dreams that had quietly faded as life became structured and practical. When her phone buzzed with a text from Michael asking how the trip was going, she typed, "It's beautiful here," then paused before adding anything deeper, realizing she wasn't yet sure how to explain what she was feeling. The next day she allowed herself to explore more freely, joining a walking history tour where she listened closely to stories about the city's past, asking questions, laughing with strangers, surprised by how engaged she felt. Later, she returned to the bookstore, telling herself it was because she wanted another recommendation, and Daniel greeted her with genuine recognition, asking how she liked the memoir, and they spoke again, this time about choices and risk and the courage it takes to change direction. He mentioned he once worked in corporate finance in New York but left to open the shop because success had started to feel hollow, and his honesty struck her not because it was dramatic, but because it was simple. He had chosen alignment over expectation. Laura realized she admired that clarity. Their conversation stayed respectful, never crossing boundaries, but it stirred something inside her, a reminder that she once valued curiosity and creativity as much as stability. After leaving the bookstore, she walked along the harbor again, noticing how the sky shifted colors at sunset, and she caught her reflection in a shop window, seeing not just a wife or a manager, but a woman rediscovering parts of herself she had set aside. That night she dined alone at a small seafood restaurant, nervous at first about sitting by herself, but as the meal progressed she relaxed, savoring each bite, watching the candlelight flicker, realizing she did not need constant company to feel whole. Back at the inn, she stood in front of the mirror and studied her own expression, noticing a spark in her eyes that had been missing for years, and she understood that this trip was gently peeling away layers of routine, revealing the woman beneath responsibilities. She loved Michael, she reminded herself again, but she also recognized that she had allowed her world to shrink into predictability, trading passion for practicality without even noticing the shift. As she turned off the lights and climbed into bed, the question returned stronger than before. When did she stop choosing herself? The ocean breeze drifted through the open window, carrying a quiet promise of change, and Laura felt certain that by the time she left Charleston, she would not be the same woman who arrived, because for the first time in a long while, she was not just living her life, she was examining it. By the third day in Charleston, Laura felt lighter, as if the tight schedule she carried back in Chicago had slowly loosened its grip, and she moved through the city with more confidence, no longer checking her phone every hour, no longer measuring her time by productivity but by experience. She woke early again, but this time not from habit, rather from excitement to see the sunrise over the harbor. And as she stood barefoot on the sand outside the city, watching soft pink light stretch across the water, she felt a quiet strength building inside her, a reminder that she once loved simple beauty without needing to document or justify it. Later that morning, she returned to the bookstore, not out of impulse but with intention, because something about that space felt grounding, and Daniel greeted her with the same warm ease, asking how her trip was unfolding, and she surprised herself by answering honestly instead of politely, telling him she felt like she was remembering parts of herself she had forgotten. He listened without interruption, leaning lightly against a shelf, and shared that when he left corporate life years ago, people questioned his choice, but he had realized he could not live only to meet expectations, and his words did not feel like advice, but like lived truth. They spoke about change, about fear, about how easy it is to fall into roles that look stable but feel limiting, and Laura admitted that she had become the dependable one in her marriage, the one who kept everything smooth, and somewhere along the way she stopped asking what she needed. That afternoon, sudden rain poured over the city, and she found herself under the bookstore awning beside Daniel, watching the street glisten, and in that small shared shelter he asked gently, "When was the last time you did something just because you wanted to?" The question caught her off guard because she could not remember. Her decisions had been shaped by practicality for so long that desire had taken a back seat. She returned to the inn thoughtful and restless, pacing her room as rain tapped against the windows, realizing that her dissatisfaction was not caused by Michael's ambition alone, but by her own silence. She had never told him she missed romance, never told him she felt unseen, never told him she longed for more than efficiency. That evening, she joined a small art class advertised in the inn's lobby, picking up a pencil and sketch pad for the first time in years, and though her lines were uncertain at first, she felt joy in the act itself, not caring whether the drawing was perfect, only that it was hers. As she sketched the outline of the harbor, she remembered being 22 and fearless, dreaming of combining creativity with career, and she wondered why she had convinced herself those dreams were impractical. After class, she walked slowly back through lamplit streets, thinking about her marriage not with resentment, but with clarity, recognizing that love had not disappeared, only routine had dulled it, and she understood now that waiting for Michael to notice her unhappiness was unfair because she had hidden it so well. The next morning, on her final day, she visited the bookstore one last time to return a borrowed local guide, and Daniel handed her a small note with the title of another memoir, saying, "Whatever you choose next, make sure it's yours." And there was no flirtation in his tone, only encouragement, which made her respect him even more. She thanked him sincerely, aware that their connection had been meaningful not because it promised something new, but because it reminded her of something old within herself. Later she walked alone along the beach, wind brushing her hair back from her face, and she allowed herself to imagine two futures. One where she continued living quietly, adjusting to routines without question, and another where she spoke honestly, pursued creativity again, asked for partnership instead of simply offering support. And for the first time she understood that the second option did not require leaving her marriage but transforming it. She realized she did not want escape. She wanted engagement. She did not crave a new love story. She craved renewal within her own. As the waves rolled steadily toward shore, she felt a calm decision settle inside her chest. She would go home and speak openly, not with accusation but with courage, not blaming Michael but inviting him into a deeper connection. This trip had shown her that she was still vibrant, still curious, still capable of growth, and that truth mattered more than comfort. When she packed her suitcase that evening, she moved with purpose, folding clothes neatly, placing the new books on top, and glancing around the in-room that had held her questions and clarity. She no longer felt uncertain or unsettled, but steady, aware that change would not come from dramatic gestures, but from honest conversation. As her plane lifted off the next morning, she looked down at the coastline fading beneath clouds and felt gratitude rather than longing, because she was not leaving something behind. She was carrying something forward, a clearer understanding of herself and the quiet confidence that she could reshape her life not by running from it, but by stepping fully into it. When Laura's plane touched down in Chicago, she felt calm instead of confused, and as she walked through the terminal with her suitcase rolling behind her, she knew the real journey was about to begin, because clarity means nothing without action. Michael was waiting near baggage claim, hands in his coat pockets, scanning the crowd until his eyes found hers, and she noticed something different in his expression, a mix of relief and nervousness, as if he sensed she had returned changed in ways he could not yet measure. He stepped forward and hugged her longer than usual, asking softly, "How was it?" And instead of giving a quick polite answer, she said, "It helped me see things clearly." Her voice steady but serious, and during the drive home she watched familiar streets pass by, realizing that nothing outside had changed, but everything inside her had shifted into focus. That evening, after unpacking, she asked Michael to sit with her at the kitchen table where he had first given her the ticket, and the symbolism was not lost on either of them. She took a slow breath and began speaking honestly, explaining that the trip had shown her how much of herself she had set aside, how she had become efficient instead of expressive, supportive instead of seen, and how she missed feeling like a partner rather than a project manager of their life. Michael listened without interrupting, his usual instinct to solve things replaced by stillness, and when she admitted that she felt lonely at times even within their marriage, his eyes softened with concern rather than defensiveness. He confessed that sending her away had been his attempt to fix what he sensed but did not understand, that he thought space would recharge her without realizing she needed connection more than rest. And he admitted he had buried himself in building his business partly out of fear of not providing enough, fear of failing them both. The conversation stretched for hours, not heated but honest, filled with pauses where they absorbed each other's words instead of preparing rebuttals. And Laura explained that while in Charleston she rediscovered her love for art and creativity, that she wanted to make room for those parts of herself again, and she needed his support not just in theory, but in practice. Michael reached across the table and took her hand, saying he did not want a marriage built only on shared responsibilities, but on shared growth. And for the first time in years, she saw vulnerability in him that matched her own. Over the next few days, they began making small but meaningful changes, not dramatic promises, but practical shifts. 2 evenings a week with phones off during dinner, one weekend day reserved for something enjoyable rather than productive, conversations about dreams instead of only logistics. Laura signed up for a local art class in the city, nervous but excited, and when she brought home her first sketch, Michael studied it with genuine interest, asking questions about her inspiration rather than offering quick praise, and that curiosity felt like oxygen. He adjusted his schedule gradually, delegating tasks at work to free up time, and though it was not always easy, he showed effort consistently, proving that listening had turned into action. One Saturday, they visited a small gallery downtown, something they had not done in years, and as they walked through quiet rooms filled with paintings, Laura felt his hand slip into hers naturally, not out of habit, but intention, and she realized that attraction in long marriages often needs attention to stay alive. They talked more openly about fears and desires, about how easy it is to drift into routine without noticing. And instead of blaming each other for past distance, they treated it as a shared lesson. Laura also examined her own patterns, recognizing that she had avoided asking for more because she feared seeming ungrateful, and she promised herself she would no longer shrink to keep peace. Weeks passed, and the changes settled into rhythm. Laughter returned in small moments, like cooking together and teasing each other over burnt toast, or planning a short weekend trip nearby, where they explored a lakeside town without tight schedules. One quiet evening, as Laura sketched by the living room window and Michael read on the couch, she felt a deep steadiness inside her. Not the restless questioning she carried to Charleston, but a grounded awareness of who she was becoming. She understood now that the trip had not been about escape or temptation. It had been about reflection. The attention from a stranger in a bookstore had reminded her she still had depth and curiosity, but it was the courage to bring that awareness home that truly changed her life. Months later, when friends asked how her anniversary trip had been, she would smile and say it was transformative, not because anything dramatic happened, but because it forced her to speak, to choose growth over silence. One evening, Michael surprised her with tickets to a local art exhibit featuring emerging artists, and as they stood together studying a bold abstract painting, he whispered, "I like this version of us." And she squeezed his hand, replying, "So do I." She realized that discovering the truth about herself did not pull her away from her marriage. It strengthened it, because authenticity invites intimacy. The woman who boarded that plane uncertain and quietly restless had returned confident and honest, and by choosing to share that truth instead of hiding it, she reshaped not only her own path but the future of their relationship. In the end, the trip Michael sent her on was not an escape from her life, but a doorway back into it. And the greatest change was not in where she traveled, but in how bravely she decided to live once she came home.